Last week, I made a video addressing the similarities I could see with regards how Stella and Robin were both treated by How I Met Your Mother and how the show seems insistent on punishing them for not choosing to end up with Ted by setting them up with men who range from ew to gross to seriously, Tony. And somewhere in there, whilst filming the video, I had brought up the fact that whilst Stella had only one relationship after Ted, the aforementioned Tony, Robin, on the other hand, had to deal with a slew of miscreants that were nowhere near her level, and it's been so painful to watch. However, it's pretty much obvious at this point that the show has its eyes set on having her eventually get together with Barney, which, damn it, I called this since back in season one when they had that moment when she stood in as his wingman and he took her to the cigar club and she just fits so right in his world and with his interest. I called it that they had a connection, a believable one, and I'm pretty chuffed at the fact that I ended up being right. However, no matter how happy I am, it doesn't take away from the fact that her relationship storyline with Barney seems also to take its root in what the writers seem to be doing with Ted and how basically the men that came after him just do not quite measure up. And I would like to dive into that because for Barney to work, How I Met Your Mother needs him redeemed. The question though is the show pulling it so far in season 4? Of course, before I start talking about Barney and his redemption and how that flows into his relationship with Robin, let's kick things off with some introductions, just in case this is your first time finding my channel or stumbling onto this particular series of mine. Hello, I'm Noria, and welcome to my How I Met Your Mother video series, where I am currently documenting my first time ever watch of the show while sharing my thoughts as I go along in a stream of consciousness style analysis where I talk about these characters and their choices, try to analyze their behavior and make guesses about how events might play off in the future based off of my thoughts on how the story is progressing and what I learn about these characters with every new episode I watch. As such, I will like to reiterate that this really is my first time watching the show, and I have so far been able to stay away from all discussions as it pertains to How I Met Your Mother and its characters. So, what you are in fact getting really is a blind reaction of a series that finished airing years ago. And from what I have been able to gather, you all have enjoyed watching me taking this show and the characters as I guess my way in the dark about how things might play out or have played out. And as such, I would like to ask that you please continue to abstain from dropping any spoilers in the comments. I appreciate the work you all have put in so far to keep things spoiler free for me. Thank you. If you do want to say something that addresses a point I made but which veers into spoiler territory, just give the spoilers ahead warning followed by a bunch of asterisks so I don't accidentally get spoiled while scrolling by, and so I can ignore that particular comment while other subscribers or non-subscribers who are watching my video can interact with your comment and you all can chat about how right or wrong I am and what I successfully noticed or didn't notice. And for those who are keeping track, I have currently watched up to How I Met Your Mother season 4 episode 24. Plus, if this is your first time stumbling on one of these videos, kindly know that I do have a format where I split the video into 3 parts: the intro, the synopsis, and then finally my thoughts. As such, I have included timestamps to help you navigate the video as you so choose. But before I get into the synopsis part of the video, I would like to say a big thank you to my lovely patrons and YouTube members whose support have been instrumental in helping me continue to make content, especially since I started doing this full time at the start of last year, which was the last time I was in paid employment. And a special shout out to Lena, Sherry, Kat, and Holly for their extra support. You get all the hearts and kisses to mwah. If you too would like to support me on Patreon or become a YouTube member to enjoy certain perks, maybe even get a shout out, the link to do so is in the description bar. Now, with all that said and done, How I Met Your Mother season 4, episode 22, because yes, whilst I have officially watched the season 4 finale and I'm about to start season 5, season 4, episode 22 is what I would like to give my synopsis on, since events as they played out in the episode is quite crucial to the character arc, growth, and redemption that the writers seem to have Barney on as they are telling this story. So, How I Met Your Mother Season 4, Episode 22, titled Right Place, Right Time, opens on Ted with the iconic yellow umbrella in hand. At this point, every downtime the show has Ted bring out that yellow umbrella, I remember his words from the No Tomorrow episode, that's season 3, episode 12, when he and Barney join in on the St. Patrick Day celebrations. And Ted mentions to his kids about their mother being in the club that night and there being a connection between her and the umbrella. And so, ever since then, every time I see Ted step out with the yellow umbrella, I sit at the edge of my seat wondering if that is finally the episode when we get to meet his kid's mother. I am sad to confirm that there is no mother making an appearance in this episode either. Instead, we see Ted walk out of the apartment building. He first starts to head to his right, but then heads left. We see him stop at a newsstand and then later he hands some coin to a homeless man. And then when he gets to the crosswalk and is about to cross over, a woman's hand reaches to tap him on his shoulder. Like I said earlier, I thought this was the infamous mother at that point in time. Unfortunately, it was not. Ted then does that old rewind thing to explain how we got into that situation. You see, Ted finally got his first client in Mosby's designs, and said client had requested that he design a restaurant shaped like a cowboy hat. Unfortunately for Ted, as one would expect, the job isn't getting his creative juices flowing and Ted is quite quickly stuck. Robin suggests that he go for a walk, pointing out that doing so might help him clear his head and make way for new ideas. And so Ted does just that. He grabs the umbrella like Robin suggests, since it might rain, and he decides to go get a bagel. As he leaves the apartment, he initially turns to his right, but changes his mind and went left. Why did he go left, you wonder? Well, the answer is because his usual bagel place, Schlegel's Bagels, is on the right, which was why Ted instinctively went that way. But then he remembered that Robin had let it slip a couple of days prior that the terrible case of food poisoning that had seen her barfing on air into a woman's purses happened courtesy of Schlegel's Bagels. And so Ted decided to save himself from all of that. He stops at the newspaper stand to grab the day's paper for the sake of Barney, and I will come back to that in a bit as it's very important to Barney's subplot in the episode. Anyway, Ted grabs the paper and after reading the section he was interested in, he heads over to drop money for the homeless guy, who it turns out is Milt, a man that Ted owes $1 million to in singles. Now, how does Ted own Milt $1 million? Well, Ted takes us back to Marshall and his obsession with coming up with charts. Things got so bad that the entire gang had to stage an intervention just to get Marshall to stop making the damn charts. And instead, Marshall pulls out a chart in the middle of his chart intervention to show them the stats about how their data is inaccurate with regards to his charts. Marshall thinks this is the end of it until he's meant to give a presentation at work and realizes to his horror that his charts aren't present. He then calls Ted, who cheerfully informs him that they had chucked out all of Marshall's charts into the garbage in order to save him from himself. Marshall, though, is not happy about being saved since he's on the verge of being fired, considering that his charts that is meant to be using for a work presentation were all gone. Ted promises to get the charts back and goes dumpster diving in order to try and do so. Unfortunately for him, he doesn't find the charts after rooting around in the trash. What he does discover, though, is Milt, who had fished out the charts from the trash earlier and was now selling them. Ted tries to get them back, but Milt drives a hard bargain and insists on Ted paying him $1 million for them. Ted reluctantly agrees, but only if Milt is willing to collect the payment in $1 notes over the next 1 million days. Milt agrees and a deal is struck. Ted then rushes over to the bank to give Marshall the charts, and Marshall is able to successfully pull off his presentation. And so that is why Ted had to take the time from his day to give Milt his dollar payment for the day before he then makes it to the crosswalk where he had the encounter that led to him meeting his kid's mother. He then continues that if anything had changed in his day that day, then fate would have played out differently and his kids wouldn't be there. But because everything happened exactly as it did, the circumstances were aligned just right to lead him to that moment. And it is something that made him so happy that he imagines going right back to give everyone who had indirectly or directly been related to why he made it to the crosswalk at that very moment a big hug to thank them for how they contributed ultimately to him meeting his one. The camera then pans out to reveal that the hand belongs to Stella and she's the one who reached out to him, which God's Ted gives the absolute worst cliffhangers by the gods. But anyway, now to circle back to Barney's part of the plot. So when Ted runs into Barney at McLaren's, Barney shows him a copy of Bro's Life, a magazine, turning his attention to the supermodel in the issue, Petra Petrova, who is an absolute hottie. And Barney informs Ted that he has a date lined up with her, which would effectively make Petra the 200th woman Barney would have had sex with. Now, as expected, his friends are quite grossed out about this, although Marshall does pull out a chart to calculate that based on the number of women that Barney hits on in a day and the number of days that there are in a year, one can deduce that Barney's batting average is pretty damn low if he's only had sex with 200 women so far. Of course, the lot of them ignore the core of what Barney considers the most important, which is that he has had a goal of having sex with 200 women, and Petra is the one woman he believes would be the perfect person to have at such a significant number. When his friends ask him what is up with all of that, Barney takes us on the journey to his 12-year-old self having to come face to face with Matthew Panning, a bully who had mocked Barney for not having any game, whilst he's boasted about having been with 100 girls, to which 12-year-old Barney had responded that he would be with 200 girls someday in order to show up Matthew Panning. And so everything Barney has been doing has been to lead to this moment. The problem, though, is that with an hour to go before he's to meet Petra for their date, Robin, who has been going through Barney's list, points out to him that he had accidentally listed the same woman twice, which technically meant that he was not at number 199 as he had assumed, but he was at number 198. Barney, who believes that a woman as gorgeous as Petra cannot be some random number 199 on his list and deserves to be in the exalted, memorable position of 200, decides that he needs someone quick to fill that void. Unfortunately for him, he strikes out with all of the women he tries to hit on since they can smell his desperation and weirdness. And so Barney decides to head to his gym and hit up Pauline, the bodybuilder who has been hitting on him since he started going there, but he had been turning her down since her being a muscle mommy meant that she wasn't his type. Barney, you stupid man. But now that he's on the clock, he runs to her and sure enough, they have sex. By the time Barney makes it back to McLaren's, he's barely able to walk and he tries to ice himself down in preparation for his date with Petra. But then Robin breaks the news to him. Yes, he listed the same woman's name twice, but he had also accidentally skipped a number, which therefore meant that his initial count of 199 had been correct. And so, therefore, Pauline became his number 200 and not Petra, to Barney's sheer horror and dismay. And so when Ted stopped by at the newsstand, it was to pick up the bodybuilding magazine Muscle Sexy, which featured Pauline, Barney's number 200. Much later, after Ted has had his run in with Stella, we see Barney at the bar waiting to be joined by Matthew Panning. When Matthew shows up, Barney gloats that he won and has had sex with 200 women like he said he would back when they were 12. Matthew looks at him like he has lost his damn mind and tells him that he lied. They were 12. How on earth was he meant to have gotten with 100 girls at age 12? Barney is shocked and looks lost as he tears up his list after Matthew leaves and considers what the rest of his life would look like now. At this point, he turns around and sees Robin, who notices him looking at her and smiles at him. The end. Now, like I stated at the start of this video, it is quite clear that How I Met Your Mother has earmarked Robin to end up with Barney. The signs have been there for me at least since the very first season at the Cigar Club, but things were kicked into high gear by the end of season 3 when we get the confirmation that things for Barney had moved from just sex to him having developed feelings for an oblivious Robin after their one night together. Now, Personally, I've always been a sucker for that particular trope where you have a player character who has so far coasted through the story, either being able to get with anyone they want or who have been going through their partners with a clear marked case of indifference, but then they stumble their way into falling for another character who treats them with the type of indifference that familiarity brings because they know their character very well, and to them they weren't expecting anything special. To Robin, their one night together was just Barney being Barney, and Barney being there at that moment when she was feeling emotionally vulnerable. She waved it off as a mistake, came clean to Ted about it, and put the entire incident behind her, unaware that this had set Barney off on a journey of falling hopelessly in love with her, even as he tries to act otherwise. And then the mask falls off at the end of season 3 when Barney is in the hospital and the gang are talking about the validity of the claim that when you're in a situation of life and death, the image that flashes through your mind's eye is that of the person or thing you love the most. And Barney gives that quick glance to hint to us that he saw Robin, and we immediately get confirmation that, oh, yes, Barney is falling and there is nothing he can do about it. Now, I will not make any claims or attempt to even presume to know exactly what went down in the writer's room, but I can imagine that the discussion arose at the end of the season that with things being set in motion to show Barney's interest in Robin, and with her not being one of the many nameless women that Barney has hooked up with in the show so far, but instead being someone that matters to the narrative, that matters to the audience, that matters to the rest of the McLaren Five, because, like I have said before, the friend group are pretty dismissive of the feelings of the women that Barney has been hooking up with. His actions are more ones that entertain them, even as they act all grossed out by them. And yet, when the truth spills out, you have even someone like Marshall stating that these women are basically sluts, and Robin implies that they deserved it. So the disrespect is clear. However, that is not something that the team would tolerate for Robin. And so, therefore, the onus then falls on the writing to transform Barney from the sex pest he's been for the last 3 seasons to someone who can be worthy of and deserving of one of their own, Robin. And so we enter season 4 with that game plan being set into motion. And yes, we had Barney tell Lily about his feelings for Robin. And whilst that is a good place to start, so have Barney spilling his guts to the only other one outside of Ted who is more inclined to swoon at the thought of romance, it is him doing just that. Lily, of course, tries to encourage him to take the bold step and admit his feelings to Robin, but Barney cannot do that. Now, we know he can't bring himself to say it because of his fear that doing so would make it real. But within the art of telling a story, Barney's hesitance is his eternal conflict about what it would mean and how much it would change for him to allow himself be that vulnerable. Story wise, however, Barney's internal conflict is a narrative choice in order to drag things out for suspense, yes, but also because whilst internally is dealing with all those emotions, the narrative needs him to be at the point where they have effectively done a transformation of Barney from lecher to romantic interest that the audience can then root for. And so they do the tried and trusted thing, show a more vulnerable Barney to boost his likability in order to redeem him, have him be established as doing things, selfless things for Robin that isn't tied to him trying to get her into bed, which we know is hard work for Barney. And finally, we get to the root of why he's the way he is, why he's someone so obsessed with sex and what he needs to prove by it. So that once we access those 3 things as an audience, we get to see Barney Stinson through new lens. And for those who might initially have thought him a terrible match for Robin, they can then start to rethink their stance. And so we have the Stinsons episode where the gang is suspicious about where Barney seems to be going to and who he's so secretive when talking to, even going as far as turning down a chance to hit on a hot woman. Only for them to arrive at the house and discover that it's Barney's mother, Loretta, and that he's been living a secret life with a wife and a son that turned out to be actors he had hired. Why did he do so? Because his mother was dying, and the one thing that he assumed would help her find some peace in her final moments would be to give her the assurance that he's found love and a happy family that would delight her and give her that peace of mind. Except that the news ended up cheering his mother up so much that it gave her the strength to fight towards recovery. And when she did recover, it meant that Barney had to keep the lie going. It is outrageous in the way only Barney's matters can be, but it also speaks to the fact that Barney Stinson is ultimately a mama's boy and that everything he does is a performance braggadocio in order to present himself a certain way. For his mother, it was to avert any disappointment she might feel about him not being the type of son that she wants him to be. And she ends up reminding Barney about her own checkered past and insists that what she wants is for him to be truly happy and to find the love that would do so for him, not this fake pretense thing he has going on with the family and friends he had hired. At which point, of course, the writers had Robin enter to once again dangle that bit before the audience, hinting at the fact that everything that came prior to Robin was Barney giving the performance of what he believed was expected of him. And the goal is to eventually, ultimately, have him be himself. And I know I've said it several times, but I do still believe that everything that happened with Rhonda also played a big number on how Barney ended up viewing sex as something being transactional and why he's never really been able to see anything inappropriate with his actions. That was a grown ass woman preying on two teenage boys, the first of whom she propositioned as payment for her having sex with his baby brother. I know the show plays it off for laughs, but Rhonda is a predator, and so it syncs up that Barney ends up following in her footsteps in a certain regard since she was his first introduction to sex. But like I stated earlier, there are three parts to the Barney redemption season. We've gotten to see him be vulnerable with the Stinson episode. And in the Possessibly episode, he gets the chance to shine in an understated way, where he's the only one within the friend group who, as my people would say, carried Robin's issues on his head, i.e., he was personally invested in her getting to stay in the US and having her visa renewed. I know. Every one of the McLaren Five were all up in arms and invested in the issue, but it was Barney that helped Robin with her video resume. And he was the one who took the time to methodically call up every single station, handing over said resume, and even went as far as negotiating for Robin's salary. And that was one of the most selfless acts we've seen him do. It ranks right up there with him rushing to try and be at Ted's bedside, not even waiting to take a cab, and instead running all the way to the hospital on foot when he heard Ted had been in an accident. Say what you will, but when Barney Stinson loses the veneer of sex pest that was the entire personality he was given, and he lets himself shine through, we do see moments of him being a great friend to Ted, to Lily, and in the Possessibly episode to Robin as well. And he does it with no expectations of getting anything in return. He did that for her simply as her friend. And then there's getting to the root, the core reason, the foundational moment that birthed the sex pest that is Barney. And we get to see that in Right Place, Right Time. I honestly did not have it on my bingo card that the reasons the writers would give us for why Barney is so obsessed with sex, why he keeps track of it, why he continues to push and push in order to get laid as many times as he can, is because his ass has made a bet at 12 to have had sex with 200 separate women. Like, how pathetic is that? That his entire oish ways can all be laid solely at the feet of his ass trying to one up a 12-year-old's lie. That Barney, for once, did not have the thought click for him that maybe the 12-year-old was lying about having had sex with 100 girls. He didn't think about it as a child and did not even process it either as an adult. It took now adult Matthew Panning looking at him like he's an absolute idiot for having believed his lying 12-year-old ass for the truth to finally sink in for Barney. His actions have been driven by a desire to outrun a falsehood that never even existed. The symbolism of having Barney then follow it up by tearing up the list he had been keeping of the women he's been having sex with, after which he thinks out loud about what else he would do now for the rest of his life, and the camera then pans over to Robin, is the writers directly telling us that, hey, you see that? We're wiping the slate clean for Barney. He gets to stop trying to chase this idealized version of what he thinks he should be, this sex crazed sex god that he's had in his head since he was 12, and now he can just simply be himself without needing to show off or pretend for someone else. And now that he's reached that stage of enlightenment, now that he's let go of what had had a hold of him for so long, he can turn his attention, his full self, to Robin. And before you bring it up that, well, didn't he try and hook up with another girl like 2 episodes later at Ted's birthday party? I would like to point out that he did that to make a point. He was panicking about Robin having told him that she's in love with him and so was trying to avoid his feelings. We all know that it was still Barney panicking and being unable to process what had happened, i.e., Robin's declaration in an emotionally mature way. Hell, Robin herself pulling the Mosby, which the friends call the act of springing an I love you in the early stages or start of the relationship, which they all know is the call of doom, on Barney is also a sign of her not having the wherewithal to handle emotional crisis as well. Yet another instance of just how well the two of them fit. Two peas in a pod. But sorry, I digress. As I was saying, the season ends open ended as it pertains to Barney and Robin's relationship, with the signs being clear that they will maybe see how they can make it work come season 5. And that is something I'm interested in, because I still don't think that Barney and Robin would immediately have their shit together by the season. Like I stated at the start of the video, the writing is only just starting to have Barney redeem himself. And that is going to be an ongoing process, which, when you really think about it, is still kind of aligned to falling within the sphere of Robin's relationship post Ted, with it being men who are basically works in progress. Like, I'm sure the Ted fans might disagree with me, but it really does feel like the narrative is punishing her for not having chose him. And speaking of Robin, she herself is averse to any form of love, and there seems to be something there that she too needs to work through, which I don't think is going to be done in just one season to have her permanently with Barney. So it would be interesting to see how she and Barney work it out, since of all of the McLaren Five, only Lily and Marshall have that whole show long we are committed to each other thing going. The other three are meant to navigate different relationships until they individually find their happy endings. And considering that Ted is still stuck trying to get the fucking point about how he met his children's mother and still hasn't done so yet, I have a feeling that the writers will be stringing Robin and Barney along for a while longer. That way, we get three separate relationship perspectives. There's the long term committed partnership with Lily and Marshall. There's the two friends within the group who realize how perfect they are for each other, and after a couple of ups and downs, end up permanently together, that they have clearly set aside for Robin and Barney. And then there's the last of the group navigating life as a romantic, desperate for love, until he finally finds his one and brings her into their world. And that is going to be Ted. It is pretty clear that is what the writing is aiming for. But of course, these are all just my thoughts. I would, as always, love to hear yours, whether or not you agree with me. Please share them in the comments. Like this video, however, if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet but enjoyed anything of what I had to say, share it so others can find my channel as well. Or you can check out my gaming or ASMR channels if they sound like something you might potentially be interested in. I have them both linked in the description bar. I will see you tomorrow with a new video. Until then, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.